Hi everyone, my name's Andrew. I'm here to discuss the economic components of supply and demand and how they've affected the current Australian housing crisis. I'd like to review the demand firstly, what moved demand in this direction and increased the demand Australia-wide. The number of buyers obviously was one of the things that came to prominence early on when our housing crisis started to become apparent. It started earlier on than that, really, with the quantitative easing that started in the early part of 2020 when COVID started. The Reserve Bank started quantitative easing measures under guidance of the federal government in acquiring state and federal bonds in excess of $300 billion worth. They reduced interest rates to the lowest cash rate, 0.1% in November of 2020. That put a spur in lending. Banks went into overdrive with lending, and as did the home buyers. We saw a spike, an increase in demand, increased number of buyers. There was also negative gearing concessions with investors as they continued to purchase property, as did foreign investors. There was a large amount of temporary visa holders in Australia. In 2021, the last census that was carried out, there was 1.6 million temporary visa holders in Australia, so they all were factors that increased demand. We had a greater amount of people living in sole occupants, and as we started to move out of COVID and the borders did open in 2022 in February, we saw net migration go through the roof in excess of 300,000 people. So they were all factors that increased demand. We had a reduced amount of suppliers that started to move the supply graph in this direction, and some of the factors that caused that were a limited amount of tradesmen and builders to complete the task. We had restricted land releases and quite lengthy planning and building permit processes that dragged that process out. There was always a delay, and anyone who's done building projects themselves would be aware of that. The war in Ukraine started in early 2022 in February. Fuel prices spiked, and delivery of building materials started to increase. We saw several builders go into liquidation. By the middle of 2022, there was in excess of 2,000 builders who had gone broke. There were then signs that quantitative easing was causing inflation, with figures reaching near 7%. The Federal Reserve then went through a series of interest rate rises, whereas about nearly 10 of them in sequence, and bringing the cash rate up to 4.1% by June of 2023. The number of builders obviously kept falling over, and the problem exacerbated. What are we going to do to solve it? Well, the first thing I can come to think of is more builders. We need more builders. We need to assist our builders, and we need to assist construction companies in the training of apprentices. The government needs to start a four-pronged attack, and that's one of the most important, if not the most important issue they need to address. Streamline the release of land, privatise possibly the planning and building permit process, and certainly increase the speed that we have to process it at such a lengthy and expensive part of home construction. Also, government acquisition of land for first home buyers, abolish the stamp duty for first home buyers is very important. A review of migration would be an important point to discuss. I think that needs to be addressed. Foreign ownership of Australian land needs to be paused or abolished, at least for the time being, until we have this under control. And then a review of negative gearing concessions. Do we need to have a sliding scale for that? And lastly, with the supply issue, I think we need to introduce regional areas, greater use of regional areas and regional area land, use of office space in the cities for residential tenancies, warehouse and factories for residential properties need to be, or residential tenants needs to be considered. And last of all, the use of possible superannuation funds. We've got in excess of $3.5 trillion there. Under some government guarantee, we could use that to finance and provide the liquidity needed to go through this process. What the government proposed, the Housing Australia Future Fund, is at this stage is $10 billion over 5 years is inadequate. It's a drop in the ocean. So I think we need to work together in a strategic long-term plan to solve this, and it's certainly manageable. And thank you so much for your time.